This is the Investor Connect podcast program. I'm Hall T. Martin. I'm the host of this show in which we interview angel investors, venture capital, family offices, private equity, and many other investors for early stage and growth companies. I hope you enjoy this episode. Well, hello, this is Hall Martin with Investor Connect. Today we're here with Chris Willis of Latitude World. Chris, thank you for joining us.
Hi, Hal. Thank you for having me today.
Great. We also have Will Garner with us as well. Thank you for joining us, Will.
Thanks a lot, Hall. Glad to be here.
Great. Chris, can you tell us a little bit about your background and what did you do before this and what are you working on now?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm an immigration practitioner. I've been practicing immigration work for 25 years now. And, started off in Europe, actually, where I was helping people either stay in the UK or immigrate to Australia or New Zealand. And then expanded that practice into Canada, where I spent a lot of my time doing inbound immigration to Canada. And then about 8 years ago, I got involved with residence and citizenship by investment. So I was helping high net worth applicants who wanted to obtain a second residence or citizenship. And so it was a whole different offering that you would have as opposed to just dealing with one inbound country, but you're dealing with over 20. So it just really expanded my skill set and knowledge base. And the other thing that I'm quite involved in is government advisories. So I actually work with a variety of different governments to help them either structure their existing program, making refinements to it, especially in light of the COVID pandemic. Many of them are looking to set up some incentive programs to attract people to invest in their countries. Or in some cases, like we did in Anguilla, we created a program from scratch. Everything from the legislation to operations manuals to job descriptions to the marketing and promotion. So that takes up a fair bit of my time, but it's also very interesting and rewarding to see it go from beginning to end.
Great. And Will, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, Hall. I've recently joined the Latitude World team. I'm a U.S. immigration lawyer. I have an entrepreneurial finance background as well. And I've gone down the route to acquire second residency and second citizenship. Started doing this about 10 years ago. So I'll be helping a lot with American clients for Latitude.
Oh, great. So back to you, Chris. Can you tell us how you help high net worth individuals in the role you're in now?
Well, the key thing is to understand the individual circumstances of each person. And then from there, we can guide them as to which program would be best suited for them. There's a big cross section, going from lower investment amounts starting at 100,000 US in some of the Caribbean countries up to 2.5 million euros in Cyprus, for example, in Europe. So once we have a better understanding of the price point, the timescales, the motivations of the applicant, then we can better suggest which one is for them. Because it may be for security reasons, it might be a plan B, which we're going to talk a bit about later. In light of the pandemic, people are looking to have a second option in place. And so, that might be more pressing for them and a reason why they're looking to do this. For other people, it could be setting up a business in Europe, and having citizenship will certainly make that process much easier. And it could be lifestyle, it could be retirement. There's so many different reasons why people would do it. I mean, it could even be, from an American perspective, when, pre-COVID, obviously when people were traveling, there are some parts of the world where Americans aren't always that welcome. So, if you're traveling, maybe you're traveling on a different citizenship, that isn't going to raise any flags. So when you're checking into a hotel, you may be registering as a Caribbean citizen as opposed to an American. And that's not going to raise any issues. You don't want to worry there's someone behind the desk sending a list, saying there's an American in room 12. But if it was a citizen of the Caribbean, they wouldn't think twice about it. So again, it can be very varied in terms of why people would do it. And as I said, we're seeing more and more Americans looking at this as an option. What we're seeing now, of course, is with the travel ban, with as it relates to the COVID pandemic, is that, Americans can't travel as freely as they used to. The border remains closed with Canada. There's issues with the European Union, and even getting into popular places like the Bahamas, there's these restrictions for Americans. So for some people, that's the reason why they want to know that if they have to travel, that they can and not be purely reliant on the U.S. citizenship.
Oh, great. I was thinking the other day when we first talked about this subject, the high net worth individual in the U.S. has enjoyed very low taxes for some time now. And those days appear to be coming to the end. There's just only so much the deficit can take in the U.S. before taxes will go back up. And it looks like they may go back up quite dramatically. How often do you see tax issues being a motivation here?
Well, I mean, it's Americans obviously have the disadvantage of being, taxed based on their citizenship as opposed to their residency. But, there will be opportunities if they're having to restructure their businesses or other affairs, that there's an advantage to having status in a different jurisdiction. And there are also some specific tax residence programs. You look at places like the Cayman Islands, like Anguilla, Jersey and Guernsey, and the Channel Islands, Singapore, Italy. There's a whole slew of them, that offer these types of solutions. More difficult, as I mentioned, for Americans, but you may have a lot of people on their green card in the U.S. who are, not American citizens, but they have their permanent residency status. So for many of these people, they may double up their green card status in the U.S. by getting an economic citizenship somewhere else. Because if they were coming from a country that has poor travel mobility, could be places like, Nigeria, Pakistan, Lebanon, South Africa, places like that. They may say, hey, I'm happy I've got my status in the US, but let me get a second citizenship that I can travel on. Because otherwise, if they want to travel, they're still reliant on their original citizenship.
So tell me more about how this program actually works. If I wanted to get around the travel ban and I wanted to move my citizenship to another country in order to do that, what would I need to do to make that happen?
Well, I think one of the first things that we need to be clear on is you don't have to renounce American citizenship, right? So you can get dual nationality. So there's nothing stopping you from doing that. But the way they work is we sort of joke and say they're very similar, but also very different. So depending on, whether you're looking at the Caribbean or you're looking at the European option. But in general terms, they tend to include both the donation and or purchase of approved real estate as the vehicle to acquire citizenship. So in some cases, in particular in the Caribbean, you can take the donation route, which in the lowest amount in Dominica and St. Lucia is 100,000 US. So once you add in due diligence fees, government fees, professional fees, etc., you're still less than 150,000 US all in for a single applicant. So that's the quick and easy one. It's seen to be quite transactional, which it is. If we're being straight about it. But keep in mind that these countries are heavily reliant on tourism, and this COVID pandemic has just decimated them and wiped out a whole season for them. So they're looking at other incentives to bring foreign direct investment into their countries. So this investment will go into their consolidated fund, into their treasury, and then they can allocate those funds to programs as needed. The other angle is to purchase real estate. And this can be quite attractive for Americans because many Americans have been to the Caribbean, for example. They know it. There's a comfort level there. And especially if you're up in the north where you have a little bit more severe winters than what you would have down south, they say, well, I like to break up the winter and maybe in February I'll go down to the Caribbean. But if they've already got a villa down there, for example, they could use the purchase of that villa to allow them to qualify for economic citizenship. So they get almost a 2-for-1, that they're enjoying it for lifestyle reasons, but also benefit from the second citizenship. And then some of the other programs actually have a combo. So, in places like Malta and Cyprus and Montenegro, you have to buy real estate and you have to make a donation to the government. So they vary, but those are the two main areas, is donation and real estate.
And what do you see coming up in the next 6 months as far as, is it the travel ban that you think most people are going to be using this for, or do you think there may be other issues?
Well, I think the issue now with a pandemic is that, people didn't expect this to be hit so hard, and they didn't expect their mobility to be impacted, and they didn't plan for the difficulties as it relates to healthcare, having access to healthcare and the spread of the virus. So I think what people are looking at is, if this happens again, and there's obviously a lot of discussions around this, what will I do to best prepare myself and my family to make sure everybody's safe? Because let's say you wanted to, hypothetically, you said, okay, I'm going to go to the Cayman Islands and I'm going to sit it out down there. Unless you have status, either permanent resident status or a citizenship, they're not letting you in, right? And so then this is the case for many other jurisdictions. You can't just turn up as a visitor. You've got to either have permanent residency status or be a citizen. Even for Americans trying to get to Canada, unless you're a Canadian citizen, it's very, very difficult to get across unless you're an essential worker. So I think what's going to happen is people are looking at this as the reality. The sort of what if scenario has become the right now scenario. And this is where people didn't plan for it because they didn't think they had to. But now the reality is, this is impacting me and my family. How do I better plan for the future? So I think that's going to be, that reality check is going to impact a lot of people. Others, again, it may be for, just for lifestyle purposes and having that option. Others, they want their kids to have opportunities in Europe is another one. As I said, that the motivations are numerous in terms of why people would do this. But the reality is the access to healthcare and safety and security is becoming key in light of the COVID pandemic.
Do you see the number of companies welcoming American citizens? Is that growing? Is it growing fast? Or which trend do you see going there?
Well, I think right now, unfortunately, Americans are sort of persona non grata, when it comes to travel, just because the COVID pandemic hasn't been managed. And there's this paranoia that people coming in from the States are going to bring the virus with them. So even if they can show they've got their COVID negative test and this, that, and the other, it's easier for them to just put a blanket refusal saying we're not taking American citizens. However, if you were coming in, as let's say we look at a Caribbean example and you're a citizen of Antigua, then, you can get access not only to Antigua and Barbuda, but to all of the Caribbean countries that are part of CARICOM, the Caribbean community. So it does give you a lot more flexibility. And there's also the issue of healthcare, which is key. This is where we've seen a lot of interest in the Cayman Islands because they have phenomenal healthcare there, and even a lot of healthcare tourism as well. So if someone has to, say, look, I'm going to buy a house there, I'm going to get my residency status, and I'm more comfortable having my family there, knowing that I can be there for 6 months if I have to, and I have access to healthcare, and I have good communication, so I can essentially manage my affairs from the Caymans.
Great. And so, Will, you've actually done this type of work before as well. What can you say about your experience in getting citizenship elsewhere?
Well, yeah, Hall, I did this 8 or 9 years ago. It was not so on the mainstream and so popular, but I would advise anybody to do it. Nobody could really see something as crazy as COVID-19 coming. Now it's a real issue, and these are just so important to have this plan B or option to be able to go live somewhere else, take your family, have the ability to travel. I'm a citizen of a Caribbean country. I have New Zealand permanent residence. New Zealand has shut the borders. You can't come in unless you're a permanent resident or a citizen. So, I think the time now for anybody who's considering it is to do it now. And I can talk to them and provide advice from actually going through the process.
So Chris, you talked about the cost of it. Can you give us some more detail? How long does it take, and what's the process like to go through to get the citizenship in other countries?
Well, the cost will vary in terms of as I mentioned earlier, in terms of the program and which option you go for, but the processing times also vary. So in the Caribbean, for example, it usually takes about 3 or 4 months. If you were doing Cyprus, it's usually about 6 to 9 months. And if you were doing Malta, for example, you're looking at about 18 months, or give or take, because you have to be a resident for 12 months before you can apply for citizenship. So that just sort of extends the processing time. So the reality is, that for a relatively inexpensive amount of investment in a relatively quick period of time, and I'm talking in terms of immigration processing times globally, 3 or 4 months is very quick. You can have that second citizenship. So people listening to us now in sort of tail end of August, they could have a second citizenship to start the year 2021.
And so what are the tax implications if I were to move to my citizenship to Cyprus or get a dual citizenship there? Am I paying tax both ways on the American side and the Cyprus side, or do you do one or the other? How does that work on the taxing front?
Yeah, usually, Americans aside, you're taxed on your country of residence, so where you're spending the majority of your time. So typically there's a 183-day test, where you're spending the majority of your days per year. And there'll be tax treaties, of course, in place to make sure there's no double taxation for you. But in terms of where you hang your hat, that's going to be the main indicator. But of course, in the US, you still have to file by virtue of your citizenship. So, but there are, for sure, there are some attractive tax jurisdictions. And many people who have lived outside of the US for many years have established themselves quite comfortably in different jurisdictions, but still have to do their regular filings. And I know it's something that people I speak to are sort of frustrated with, but it is what it is, and you have to work with it. I don't see that changing anytime soon.
Do you see the number of countries expanding that are offering citizenship to attract healthcare tourism, tax tourism, and all these other things? Or do you think it's going to stay the same and the countries you have now are the ones that will always be there?
No, I think it's definitely expanding. I mean, as a matter of fact, our firm's been speaking to over a dozen, in the last 4 or 5 months, as a consequence of COVID, because they're saying, look, we need to find a way to generate some FDIs, and this is one way to do it. So there'll be more players coming into the market for sure. But again, the more choice there is, the better for the consumer. But then there's also the tried and tested, which I think will always maintain their place. For example, in Montenegro right now, they launched nearly a year ago now, but they still had a lot of teething problems. So they haven't been able to go to market as comfortably, let's say, as some of the other programs. So it's very key when a new program goes out that it's properly set up and managed, that it can be straight to market and also understood by the market, because they'll be familiar with a lot of different other jurisdictions. And if it's got some barriers, then it's going to be more difficult for them to present that to their clients.
Great. Well, it seems like we have a good opportunity here to expand the range of what high net worth individuals can do, where they can live, where they can gain citizenship for many reasons: tax, COVID, health, tourism, and many others out there. In the last minutes that we have here, what else should we cover that we haven't?
Well, I think one of the things is that people need to be aware of is that there's a thorough due diligence process for these applications as well, because you are applying for citizenship, right? So it's not like a tourist visa or a work permit, a temporary visa where it's less thorough. You are going to have to provide evidence of your background history. It'll be vetted by a third-party due diligence firm, and you'll be checked against, Interpol, watch list, sanctions list as well. So it is a thorough process. And also, when it comes to the investments that you're making, we're going to have to verify your source of wealth and source of funds too. So you need to be prepared to present that documentation, because that's going to be part of the process.
Oh, great. And Will, what's your recommendation for people that might want to do this? What's your advice that they should consider before they go down this path and do what you did?
I think it's mainly for most folks that have really strong U.S. ties. It's sort of a plan B. Have an option if they do need to leave one day, or for whatever reason, they have a plan B in place. Latitude has the best package solution for these type people. And again, it's going to get harder. I don't, especially for Americans, what's happening, there'll be more offerings, as Chris said, but it may get tougher on the Americans on what they have the freedom to do. Also, I wanted to bring up, Paul, that there are some sort of entrepreneur visas out there. I know you have a big network of very entrepreneurial startup type people. Latitude can assist with those as well. And I'll let Chris talk a little bit about, Canada's got one.
Yeah, there's different sort of startup, entrepreneur, even innovator visas, depending what you want to call it. So, we've actually been doing a fair bit in the United Kingdom with their innovator program, which is about matching investors with businesses that need some sort of cash injection. And then, obviously they would maintain some equity, et cetera, from there. Some of these are easier to manage than others. For example, in Canada, you may have to show that the business is running and hitting certain thresholds before you sort of upgrade from temporary residence to permanent residence. But yeah, they tend to be very much matching up a business with an investor who has a similar background that can bring some value to that business over and above just their cash. So it is another section of our business that we are involved in, but our primary focus is certainly with the investment programs, whether it be for residency or citizenship.
Sounds good. Hey, Chris, and while we've got Hall on the phone, as far as the residency, when these people acquire the second citizenship, Hall, what happens is, like Chris talked about when we first chatted, they're they don't really have a place to live, right, Chris? And so it's interesting, and I don't know, Chris, I don't think you guys really do it, but Thailand has got these elite visas, Hall, where you can, Chris, if you want to elaborate on the Thai visa, we didn't bring it up, but I think, what you do is if you could package the Caribbean citizenship with the Thai elite visa, right, Chris?
Yeah, well, the Thai one's a bit different. It is residency, it's not citizenship, and it's targeted mainly at an Asian audience, so people who wanted to spend more time in Thailand. And so it's, we don't really push that one that hard because it is more for the Asian market. That's where typically all the applicants have been from.
Okay, so for an American that says, get me out of here, I want to work remotely somewhere else, where would that be? Portugal or Malta or?
Yeah, it's there's a lot of places. Certainly the Caribbean is one. You're probably reading about Barbados has this welcome visa that's being promoted quite hard. Anguilla is actually going to be launching something similar on Friday. And, people just need to say they have to remember that's just a short-term solution. So, if you're able to work remotely, if you're a digital nomad, for example, there's other places you can be. But, the downside as an American is that you're still subject to paying your taxes every year, or reporting with the US. Yeah. So even if you're living in, wherever it is, for lifestyle purposes, for security purposes, for peace of mind, quality of life purposes, whatever you want to call it, there's places to do that. And that's why I wanted to emphasize it can be done relatively quickly and relatively inexpensively for people who are motivated.
That was just even if they got to pay the tax, which they really can't get around unless they renounce, at least it gives them a place to live, right? I mean, instead of having to live in Grenada, they can go live in Portugal or Malta,
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, and some of it, you can get, long-term visitor visas if you're a Caribbean citizen and you want to get into Europe now, then that's something you look at. But, Americans can't travel. And so it's by having the second citizenship, then it allows you to apply under a different nationality. Yeah. So that can sometimes apply to many people.
Great. Well, it sounds like the world's really changed since I traveled extensively back in the 90s. It certainly has evolved quite a bit since then. So, Chris, how best for listeners to get back in touch with you?
Well, you'll see from the show notes, all our contact details are there. Our website is latitudeworld.com, and there's a lot of information on there. You can also email me directly from that. My email is christopher.willis@latitudeworld.com. That's usually the best way to get in touch with me is via email.
And Will, what's the best way to get back in touch with you as well?
Yeah, you can reach me at the best way is email at will.garner@latitudeworld. Looking forward to hearing from people.
Great. We're going to put those in the show notes for all the listeners. So those who want to get back in touch with you, they can remember Latitude World and also find it on the show notes that we have there. I want to thank both of you guys for joining us today and sharing this information. I think it's going to be quite helpful as we go through this COVID pandemic and as we go through another change of leadership in the fall, potentially. And so I think there's a lot of reasons people may want to look into these areas further. But I appreciate you guys taking time to join us today.
Well, thank you, Hall, for the opportunity to speak to you and to your listeners.
Thanks a lot, Hall. We really appreciate it.
Investor Connect helps investors interested in startup funding. In this podcast series, experienced investors share their experience and advice. You can learn more at investorconnect.org. Hall T. Martin is the director of Investor Connect, which is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to the education of investors for early stage funding. All opinions expressed by Hall in podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Investor Connect. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for the basis of investment decisions.